we forget a lot of times that cinnamon is demulcent and, it
Mm.
has that wonderful mucilage in it. It doesn't have as much as other plants. If you like playing with medicine making and so on, you can actually really bring out the demulcency and mucilage in cinnamon.
Hello, and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. Welcome to a new episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast. I'm excited to bring you this conversation with herbalist Bevin Clare. Not only does she have a profound love of cinnamon, she even named her daughter after cinnamon, she's also filled with so much information about how to work with herbs beyond capsules and expensive products to really enjoying them in your everyday life. For those of you who don't know Bevin, she's an herbalist, nutritionist, homeschooling parent, a professor at the Maryland University of Integrative Health, and the program director of the Masters in Clinical Medicine program. She holds an MSc in infectious disease and is the author of Spice Apothecary and a former president of the American Herbalist Guild. You can find her wandering the world with her 2 children, munching on spices, exploring markets, and immersing in the plant world. Well, welcome to the show, Bevin. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm also honored that you fit this in because I know you just got back from yet another trip. So where have you just arrived from?
Well, I'm always just getting back or just about to leave, I think. So I just got home yesterday from Stockholm, Sweden, and that was, a fantastic little adventure. Plenty of flowering plants, and
Mm.
there's just that cool summertime there, which is really nice when you come from a warmer climate.
Mhm. And it was kind of a different trip too, I know, because this was no kiddos trip. You've been traveling with your kids since they were practically babes in arms, it seems like, but at least toddlers, right? So this
Yes.
was kid-free trip, which doesn't happen very often.
This was a kid-free trip. Yeah, they were left behind. So that was the theme of the trip was everything that we would do, everything we couldn't do or wouldn't do if the kids were there. So I mean that we didn't go too crazy or anything, but it was definitely, we'd be like, do we want to take a 8-hour canal boat to a outlying archipelago island? And we're like, yes, that's what we want to do. That's a great fits right in our theme. So it's yeah, so that was different for me. It was also fun because we spent a lot of time on the water and in the canals. And the week before that,
Mm.
I was in Panama with my family, with the canals. So it was like these different types of canals, very different
Hmm.
experiences,
Hmm.
unintentionally.
I feel like that is so Bevan. You're like, well, 2 weeks ago I was in Panama, and so then I was in Stockholm the week before. You definitely travel a lot, and we're gonna talk more about that. But before we do, I'm excited to hear how you got on this herbal path in the first place.
So I have a lot of answers to that. I think like a lot of people who have had like a life of plants, there were a lot of times in my childhood where I was dreaming about plants or mixing up potions or whatever I was doing. But I think that the time when I really realized it was um, my vocation and my life's work was when I was a young. Well, I was a young herbalist, so I was in my late teens, almost in my early 20s, and I had already studied herbalism. And I don't know if you remember being a really young adult, but I've definitely thought I knew more than I did at the time. You look back, I think, and go, "Oh gosh, what was I doing?" But I was in Southeast Asia. There's the travel theme. I was in Myanmar, And I didn't expect that people would bring me sick people because they thought I was either a doctor or a missionary because, or Peace Corps or something. Somebody would have medicines, and, there wasn't really proper medical care or hospitals available in rural areas. And I was going to all these rural areas. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time telling people no and just feeling awful about it that I couldn't help their
Mm.
sick ones. And one day I decided to say yes and to try to
Yeah.
help. Because I realized, I know the tools here. I know a lot of these plants here. And I didn't really think that was going to work that well. I mean, it was kind of like I just can't keep saying no to trying to help a person. I don't know what I would have done now, like in with my greater life experience and perspective. I don't think I was precocious enough at this point. I think back then I was like, well, herbs are amazing. They can do everything. Of course, this will help. Now I think I'm much more of a skeptic, and even though I
Mm.
still, believe entirely and deeply in herbal medicines, I also have a lot more perspective, I think. So I did decide to help, and it did help. And I think what happened was I realized the true capacity of herbalism, in a way that, at that point, and I would still think every single one of those people should be in a hospital with conventional care. But I guess realizing that when that's not available, that herbalism can actually really do things. It really, really is powerful, in these situations. So I think when I wasn't already, I mean, I was already a convert, and already dedicated. But for me, I was like, this is it. This is my path. So I went and did a master's in infectious disease and really focused on that. And so that's but I think it was kind of predestined from day one. I mean, there's never really been any other career that I've considered or had since I was a child.
Mhm.
So here we are.
Do you think it was those experiences in Southeast Asia that really, like, es made you interested specifically in infectious disease?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think it's one of these subjects where, if you have a bad infection, it's a really great place to go with conventional medicine, right? This is like antibiotics and all of these things work wonders, and they've saved my life. And yet, we know there's limitations. We know that there's, resistance. We know that there's all these things. And so I think that, plants have just an entirely different approach is the thing. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it. I think it's a lot like people love the war analogies, right? With infection. And I don't think that they're inappropriate. I don't really like thinking about war, but I think conventional medicine and antibiotics are like dropping bombs, and they do stuff, kills a lot of things. And I think that herbal medicine is like infiltration and espionage and all these different. It's very subtle and it's very nuanced, and it can have profound effects, but not in such an overt, blatant way. So I
Mm.
think when I realized that, and then I started learning more about mechanisms and so on. So yeah, I became really inspired to see the place for both, because the concomitant use of herbs and pharmaceuticals is just really fascinating in infectious disease, especially when there's no other options left. So I get all excited about that.
Mhm. And I before we dive into cinnamon, I'd love to hear about some of the different hats you've worn as an herbalist, because I think you've done some pretty interesting things. So you got your degree in infectious disease, and then how did that keep unraveling for you?
Yeah, so my first hat that I ever wore was when I think I had just had my driver's license not for very long. So I was like 16 or 17, and I grew up in New Hampshire, and the local university had these like continuing education classes. And I remember I took one that was like, herbs 101, how to make like a tea, a tincture, a salve, and learn about five herbs, and those kinds of classes. So I took that class and I just loved it. And you know, I think I spent all my time. I was the most ambitious student ever in this little class. So I spent all my time doing this, and then I'd come early, and then I'd stay late and talk with the teacher who did this. Um and at the end of the class, she said, well, she didn't really want to teach it anymore. She was done, and she was wondering if I wanted to teach it. And
Wow.
so I know. So she was like, "Well, clearly, you're enthusiastic." And so I was like, "Okay, so teaching has always been a theme for me. I think I've always been a teacher one way or another in herbs. Uh, it used to be a lot of beginner stuff. Now it's a lot more advanced stuff. I enjoy both. But I do like to dig deeply into new things that excite me and share them. And a lot of times those are more of an advanced audience, but it depends. And so I've worn those hats. I've been a clinician for a long time in between when I returned from my Southeast Asian travels for a few years. When I had my second child, I was doing a lot of clinical work. And then something had to kind of lessen. So then I kind of moved to a place where I wasn't accepting new clients and so on. So I did that. And then I've really been involved. I would say that second to herbs um, and teaching, it has always been, or even along with it, has always been the desire to make herbalism a viable career. It used to frustrate me so much when I was really young, and I, would meet all these wonderful herbalists and ask about their path and how they got going. And, the theme was poverty, basically. I mean, they might
Mhm.
have been happy and enriched and ultimately found a way, but like they lived in their cars and, and I remember just thinking, well, this is a really honorable profession. Why is it have to be the way we do this? So I was really interested in it as a career, and that brought me to being on the board of the American Herbalist Guild. Um, and I was their youngest board member ever. David Winston asked if I would go on the board, and I was like, okay. I think I was 23 or so at that point.
Wow.
And so I've been on the board since. So it's been a little over 20 years, and I've been the president and um, various roles, and I really feel like that's a great organization to promote the viability of the profession of herbalist in a really good way without it being exclusionary. And I'm a professor at a university for herbalism, so then there's another hat that I always think of an extension of the teaching piece, of course.
Mhm.
And I'm a parent and I'm a hopeless gardener. I mean, I have very sloppy, kind of wing it, like survival of the fittest sort of gardens, but I like having plants around. So that too.
Mhm.
But that's not really a job or anything.
A deep joy when you're home.
I do. I mean, I do enjoy visiting and seeing what's happening out in the gardens and checking in and so on. So it's really nice. I just like having, and then of course just having plants around to use in whatever I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. But I'm definitely not a thoughtful gardener at all.
It's nice the herbs thrive on neglect because quite a few of them can maintain.
They
Yeah.
can. Yeah, yeah, I know. I mean, it's more that, some take over others and so on, but it's true. And I think what makes me not a great gardener is probably what makes a lot of herbalists not great gardeners is the weeds are not weeds, and so it just ends up it's hard to decide who to pull out, and I'm not very good at that. So we end up with just craziness, which is fun too
Yeah.
sometimes.
I was just having that conversation with my husband the other day because he was like, "You cannot leave all of the dandelions in the garden," he tells me. And I was like, "Well, I'm cultivating some. Like these ones are young, so I'll pull them next year, when they're a little bit older
Right.
and they have more of a root." But he's just like, "Oh, like just too many dandelions in the garden, but I'm saving them." So I
Right. I
understand.
know. I mean, they're useful for all sorts of things. So, why not?
So we're going to talk about cinnamon today, which I'm really excited for. And one thing I'm just curious about, have you been to cinnamon plantations and hung out with cinnamon trees?
Yeah.
That you have.
So I really love cinnamon, and I remember the first time I ever got to try it as a plant. It was just like, I mean, it just grows on trees, and so it amazed me. And I really love cinnamon. I think it's just this. I'm very passionate about sensory herbal medicine, like very pleasurable herbal medicine, things that we can taste and smell and experience in our food, and we don't have to like take them in a tincture or a capsule or concentrated this or that. Like they're just a simple part of everyday life, and so cinnamon meets that for me, and I actually named my daughter Cassia, which is not the true genus, the species that we should necessarily be using, or the genus that we should be using, but still, I mean, naming her cinnamomum wasn't going to work. So cassia works. And I've seen cinnamon a few times, but this past January we traveled to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, of course, and got to spend a lot of time around true cinnamon or Ceylon cinnamon, and it was awesome. I learned a lot about just why it's so much more expensive and unique, the cultivation practices, the harvesting practices. I mean, people are often third or fourth generation harvesters, how they specifically peel that bark off of the wood, and just how the Sri Lankan people use this plant. I absolutely, I just fell in love with it all over again. So it was very exciting. I mean, and cinnamon's just a big part of life there. Generally as a savory element to cuisine, not sweet, whereas we think of it as kind of a sweeter thing. But yeah, it was so fun to just get to see that. And I have some fun videos of people peeling cinnamon. They use their toes a lot. It's really neat.
Wow, cool. Well, since you broached the subject, I just want to back up a little bit and talk about like what is cinnamon and cassia versus Ceylon. Some folks might not know that.
Right. So there's all these different cinnamons, or things called cinnamons, but really we're looking at the genus Cassia and the genus Cinnamomum. So you if you're just looking for a little flavor, like you want a little taste of cinnamon, really any of them can be used. They have different flavors, and but if you travel around the world, you're going to experience a lot of the cassia cinnamon, which kind of has a bold, more spicy flavor, and so on. But there are a number of coumarins in it, so that and those coumarins can have some negative health effects over term, for kind of a cumulative effect. So it's not something you ever have to be worried about, like what cinnamon am I eating, this big cinnamon bun or this cinnamon cookie or something, but more like, if I'm going to be taking this regularly for my health and well-being, is this the right cinnamon? And so the other cinnamon, the cinnamomum cinnamon, which is also called Vietnamese cinnamon or Ceylon cinnamon or true cinnamon, but it's cinnamomum xylonicum or verum. Verum is the contemporary name. You'll those that cinnamon is the one that has the most profound medicinal effects, although all of them have medicinal effects, definitely, but that's the one that's studied the most, and it's been the most relied upon for medicine. And it also has a sweeter, a little bit more mild taste, but I mean, it's really sweet, which I love about it, and a little bit more delicate, and so on. And really the bark of that one is fragile and thin, versus the cassia cinnamon, which is very thick. So if you've ever have had cinnamon quills, which a lot of people are familiar with, that rolled up cinnamon, and it's like a pretty woody thing, like you could bang it on your hand or something and it wouldn't fall apart. That is the cassia cinnamon. That's the one we often see rolled as quills. The cinnamomum or true cinnamon, when it's rolled as quills, it almost looks like a very layered, kind of flaky thing. And if you bang it, little pieces will fall off, and it's very flaky. And that's because that is actually a lot of the bark of a lot of different trees of cinnamon. But the cassia is just one piece of bark that kind of dries into this hard piece because it's very thick when they harvest it. But the cinnamomum, they kind of nestle many of these pieces of bark together, and then they all curl up and turn into this, like, flaky stick. So that's the difference, also. But they're both readily available out there. If it doesn't say what kind of cinnamon it is, it's probably a cassia cinnamon, because they're going to advertise the true cinnamon or Vietnamese cinnamon or Ceylon cinnamon, because it'll be more expensive. But it's readily available out there. So,
Such a great example of the common name creating confusion, and it's
yeah.
good to know what you're dealing with. I regularly, always have both cinnamons, or at least two
Yep.
different kinds of cinnamons anyway in my house because, like you said, if I'm gonna like make up some like mulled apple cider, then I'll throw in cassia sticks.
Yep.
But if I'm relying on it for medicine more frequently, then I definitely want the cinnamon verum.
Yep. Yeah. Such a cool plant.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm still can't get over that you got to go visit because that's kind of, I guess it's like a little bit on my bucket list to really see those trees because there's just something. I adore cinnamon and it really tickles my fancy that when I'm having cinnamon, I'm like, I'm enjoying tree bark right now. It's just something
I
just feels
know.
so good about that.
Well, and also, the leaves are really tasty. like
Hmm.
very, very tasty. So I don't think that that carries over especially well in like any dried products, but it grows all over Sri Lanka. Cinnamon does, wild and cultivated. And so like, my daughter, learned to recognize it really well. So we would walk around and she would always be grabbing cinnamon leaves and eating them. And especially like the little young leaves. If anybody's ever tasted sassafras leaves, they're not dissimilar in some ways, but the bigger leaves can be quite cinnamony. So yeah, I loved that, and I also love that in Sri Lanka they rarely cook with means other than um, burning coconut husks and the cinnamon wood, the wood from the center, because that's not the part that you get the cinnamon from; it's the outer bark. So that's and there's always a little element of scent from that. That
Mm.
they use the byproducts from the cinnamon harvest to fuel their fires for cooking. I thought that was very
Mm.
exotic to cook over cinnamon wood.
That's lovely.
It is.
Well, I'm curious what ways you like to work with cinnamon as medicine.
Yeah, cinnamon is a really cool one because there's a huge amount of supporting evidence base, which I always love to see. I love it because it reinforces traditionally what we've always done. I also love it because I think the having these clinical trials can help us to bring cinnamon into environments where maybe the door isn't as open to things that we can just say, oh, it's been used for thousands of years, and people are like, yeah, but there's no safety data or efficacy or something we can't bring. But cinnamon has that. It's also really cool because unlike some plants, when you look at the research where you're like, oh, I need to take, you know, oodles of this. So somehow we have to concentrate this and get it into an extract. And so you can take, one little pill and it equals 10 grams. Cinnamon works really well in food like doses. So, if you can fit something like a quarter of a teaspoon, or even better, a half a teaspoon into your daily diet of cinnamon, then you're good. I mean, that's really the recommended clinical dose in a lot of these studies. So that's really neat because that's easy to do. I mean, adding that much to oatmeal or to, yogurt or, all sorts of different kinds of things, cinnamon toast or something, whatever it is, even savories, it can be great. And so we use a lot of cinnamon. In fact, I always keep cinnamon, unlike a lot of the herbs and spices I have, I keep them in this like shaker jar that has two sides, one where it's like the sifted side where you can sift it out, and the other
Mhm.
side was just open where you can just pour lots. And we use it all the time. And my daughter one day was like, what's the side with the holes for? Because we're always just dumping a lot in with the open side. I'm like, oh, I just I don't think I've ever measured out a teaspoon of cinnamon ever, but that's the way I often cook. But it's just you can use a lot. So, so I think you can use cinnamon in any way that you really want to use it. If you're trying to use it to support a healthy blood sugar balance, which is what a lot of people are using it for, then using it somewhat consistently. But you don't have to get too specific about dose. So one of my favorite ways to think about using cinnamon is, let's say you live in like a multi-generational family household and diabetes runs in your family and you know that it does. So it's like in your mind, but you can add cinnamon to everyone's diet. This is what's so fun about herbs because we can't do this with pharmaceuticals. We're not going to be like, let's have everyone from the toddlers to the elderly take this pharmaceutical. No, that doesn't work. But with cinnamon, it does. So even just starting off with this healthy practice of a botanical like cinnamon, and it's also totally non-toxic, so you don't have to worry about taking too much or anything like that. It's really safe. And so and I shared a recipe with you of one of my favorite recipes, ways to take cinnamon
Yeah,
in
let's talk about that.
chocolate.
This looks so yummy.
So I call it the Synergy Fudge, and it's a recipe that's great for both cinnamon and turmeric, which I often will combine together. And the idea is that these spices work much better when they're exposed to heat, fat, and something kind of aromatic or spicy. And so you can prepare them traditionally like a curry, where you add them in with like some oil and onions and garlic and things like that, where they get that heat and they get that fat, and then you get some spices. But another way to do it is actually to use something like coconut oil and add in chocolate to it. And that kind of makes like a soft fudge, I call it. Um, So one of the things that I like about this is that you can actually get a pretty large dose of both of them in a small amount. So a small piece of fudge that would be like, an inch by an inch or 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters or something. I don't know. You could get the equivalent of 10 or 12 capsules of herbs in there at times. You're going to definitely taste them, but it's a nice flavor. And you don't need to get that much, of course. But if you're looking to make kind of a therapeutic medicinal preparation, you could put, let's say, 2 weeks worth of herbs that you want to take into a dose of fudge, cut it into 14 pieces, and just have one of those every day. And to me, that's a much nicer way to take my medicine than some of the other options that are out there. So also eases compliance, and I even have little silicone lollipop molds that I'll make like little chocolate lollipops with
Mm.
different herbs in them, and that's another fun way to do it. So I love the idea of like chocolate lollipop medicine. That works totally well for me.
Agreed, agreed. I love that you included those instructions on like how to get a 2-week dose in, because something that I think is just a little bit different from like a clinical practice versus like somebody who's like ghost writing for a website is that you'll hear like cinnamon is good for blood sugar, and then that's
Mhm.
it. And it's not a
Yeah,
like discussion of like how do you actually get that in. And then the other aspect too is people will say, well, I want food to be my medicine.
right.
But how, again, like if you're using, a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon once a week, it's not that that's bad, but we're not going to be getting that, really the dose that you would really want to see. So I love that this is yummy, but also very practical with those very specific instructions.
Yeah, that to me, that's really the thing that I spend the most time working on professionally right now. Um, as far as herbs go, like if it's politics and so on, that's a little different. But yeah, I really want to erase that barrier because I think people, they hear, oh, cinnamon is supposed to be really good to help support a healthy blood sugar balance, and they're like, I should go buy some capsules. And I'm like, no, no, no. But people don't know, they even read, oh, I'm supposed to take 2 grams a day. Well, what is that? How do I get two
Mhm.
grams? Oh, I better buy some capsules. So figuring out, how to dose these things in a daily way. And for me, that has a lot to do with my lifestyle, and I used to almost be embarrassed because for so long with what I do, there's always media requests and people are like, "So, what herbal medicines do you take every day?" And I always felt like, "Geez, I really need to like get some herbs that I take every day because I'm really not very good at that. Like I don't take any I have lots of things. I have lots of tinctures and capsules and powders and so on. But really what I take every day is almost all food based. But it's not just like, I have this little tiny sprinkle. That's really very intentional. I really think about like how, what I'm using and how much and what's in the garden and how we can make use of it. Or so I like that way. It's like life with plants versus like just trying to have choke down some supplements because I am supposed
Mhm.
to.
Mhm.
So
It's not only more fun, but also that really adds up. I mean, that's especially with cinnamon verum, to take
mhm,
that 2, 3 grams a day in capsule form is so phenomenally expensive if you're
yeah,
buying the capsules. I mean, it
yep,
really adds up. So and it's less fun. So there's
yep.
so many
Yeah.
reasons to be enjoying it.
Right. Yeah, and also it's less, it's nice to like with my kids, they are used to taking a lot of these things. Just they know it's like just like eating vegetables or something. They know they're pleasurable, but they're also healthy for you, and those aromatics. And I think one of the things we often miss out on for kids is flavor. If you look at like
Mhm.
all the top foods that babies and children, you're supposed to start feeding babies and children, there's almost no flavor in most of them. I mean, it's true, there's plenty of flavor in a sweet potato or in an avocado. I mean, those things have flavor, but actually adding herbs and spices in the mix is really important because in places in the world where people eat a lot of strongly flavored foods, you start out from day one with all
Mhm.
of these spices in your diet and you get used to them. And so a lot of the times in the West, we're starting kids with super bland foods or plain foods, and then we expect them to somehow transition into these like highly flavored foods and wonder why they don't want to
Mhm.
do that. So,
Mhm.
so I was really a big proponent of this, and adding, garlic to baby foods and that I would make and things like that all the time because kids, I have fun facts about spices that I always just absolutely love is if you have if a pregnant person has a baby inside them and they're eating these flavorful foods, the amniotic fluid actually takes on some of those aromatic flavors, and
Mm.
same with breast milk. So these are flavors that they're actually exposed to, and there's some fun research around that, looking at neonates and whether they like these smells or not based on whether they had when they were in utero they were consumed and they were used to flavors. So
Mm.
so I love kind of getting everyone on the spice bandwagon.
Mhm. And speaking of that, you not only love cinnamon, but so many spices, and you've written a book all about spices. And this is a wonderfully practical, easy to digest, pun intended, book about spices.
Yeah. So I wrote Spice Apothecary, and that is just looking at just the most common spices. So the ones that most people who cook would probably have around already, and really how to use those in therapeutic preparations. So preparations that maximize the quantity that you're using, but also making it pleasurable and easy and fun. So there's some. It's all about that. So you can figure out. Let's say you're want to support heart health, which spices are really ideal for that, and then preparations that you might be able to make those and take them on a daily basis without, again, having to buy a lot of expensive things that you have to choke down. So that's the idea with Spice Apothecary, and the cinnamon recipe is in there as well. But I know you're going to provide that to the listeners, which is great.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so many wonderful recipes. Highly recommend the book.
Thank
You
you.
know, this conversation is making me think about a question I commonly get, which is one I love to get because it's like it's just exciting to open up the world a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
so the question I'll get is something along the lines of like, well, I don't want to rely on herbs for my health.
Hmm.
Like it's almost like thinking like herbs are like drugs, like, well, I don't want to have to take this drug for the rest of my life, or I don't want to
Right.
have to take this herb for the rest of my life.
Right.
And
Right.
so would you speak to that a little bit? I'd love to hear your response.
Yeah, I think that herbs. I always like to put herbal medicine on a spectrum that starts in food, which a lot of them start way over in food, all the way to poison. So, and so it's really hard to like pick a spot on there. So in an answer like that, yeah, the ones that are over on that spectrum, from what I would say are like short-term medicines or and poisons, you don't really want to rely on those ideally. But the ones that are over more in the food department, it's not really any different than saying I don't want to keep eating fruits and veggies because I don't really want to rely on them. You need a lot of these things. We evolved with plants. Humans and plants have you've been consuming plants forever, and the phytochemical diversity of the plants that most people consume now is so much less than it used to be. So we're actually really used to all of these more medicinal things being in our bodies, and so I actually think it's more like reinforcing the way that we've lived for a long time than it is,
Mhm.
becoming reliant on them. Now, that said, when people are talking about this, they might be talking about like a product that they're spending a lot of money on, and they're thinking, I don't want to have to take this for the rest of my life. And I totally get that. So
Yeah, that's fair.
so if there is something that if a listener is taking something that feels like yeah, this is a really good thing for me. I do want to take this for the rest of my life, but I don't really want to become reliant on it. It may be something that they can integrate into their food or their diet otherwise, or find a different practice. Because while we're talking about spices, and the book talks about spices, there's a lot of herbs you can use as a powder that you can integrate into your diet and take in a lot of other ways. And the cost effectiveness, I mean, it can be 95% cheaper to buy a powder. You have to know a little bit about the bioavailability of the plant or whether it needs to be extracted or not. But a lot of the times, the things that we can take in a capsule, you can take in a powder and use it in a different way. So, like that fudge recipe, for example, you can use lots of different things in there.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, I'm already anticipating how much everyone's gonna love that recipe, and I can't wait to hear from everyone what they think of it. I just need to
Yay.
try it. Yeah. We got a little away from cinnamon. Was there anything else that you wanted to add about cinnamon, your love of cinnamon?
Um, well, I think one other thing that I'll add that's fun, especially for the herbalist people in the group, is that I think we forget all the times that cinnamon is demulcent, and it
Mm.
has that wonderful mucilage in it. It doesn't have as much as other plants, but I I never really paid attention. Like when I would make mulled cider for so many years or something like that, and I'd add a lot of cinnamon, especially if I was using cinnamon powder in addition to a cinnamon stick. When I got to the bottom of the pot, there'd be this like gloppy stuff. And I was always like, what
Mhm.
is the gloppy stuff? What is this? Not really realizing it was cinnamon. And so if you like playing with medicine making and so on, you can actually really bring out the demulcency and mucilage in cinnamon. And it can be a lot of fun to do that. So definitely encourage that element of cinnamon. It's fun to have this like kind of moist, spicy plant. So I think that's it for cinnamon. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them that come in.
I'm so glad you mentioned the demulcent because there isn't a lot of warming demulcents out there,
Right.
and cinnamon is really a wonderful one for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you know how many trips you've taken this year? We're recording this in July, so
I don't know. I mean, I think I could probably answer it and say I've been to um maybe like 8 countries this year
8
so
countries
far.
this year. Okay, not bad, not bad.
So I
I
love
love following you on social media and kinda living vicariously through your adventures, and this year when I was in Europe and I got COVID, you helped me with testing and everything, just kind of figuring out how to handle all of that. So deeply appreciative. And because you travel so much and everywhere and have so much experience, I'm especially grateful that you have a course on your site about traveling and helping, and it's so relevant too. You have a lot of information about what traveling is like today because it's not in
Mhm.
2022, not the same as it was traveling in 2019.
Right.
So
Right.
it's not specifically herbal related, but for anybody interested in travel, I highly recommend going to bevinclair.com and checking out what you have to offer there. Do you want to add anything about that class?
Yeah, I think that travel it's really possible to make it really accessible if it's something that you're interested in. I mean, I think I feel kind of I don't know, a little like bashful about the amount of travel that I do because I think it makes it look like, I'm some fabulous millionaire who can just do all of these crazy things. But the reality is that that I plan really far ahead and I look for fabulous deals. So, so when I'm thinking about like Panama and Copenhagen, I mean, sorry, and Stockholm in the summer, we found tickets to Panama for less than $200 and use some like hotel points to get a hotel and things like that. So it's a lot of this like playing this game. I love looking for like travel bargains, and that's kind of how I structure a lot of this. So I teach people how to do some of that, but also some of the logistics. I really especially for families, but I think for everyone, it really opens your eyes to travel, and I think that there's a lot of ways to do it that are a lot more in reach. And it's my dream that like every I have absolutely no problem with Disney, but like I think about every family that spends all this money to go to Disney every year or something like that, and that those the you can actually you could go so many different places in the world and experience these cultures and all sorts of different things to do with quite a bit of ease if you just have a little bit more knowledge maybe about what how to navigate some of that. So that's what I'm trying to do is like make travel becoming a traveler a lot more accessible to people. So that's the
Yeah, you
idea.
often share, what you paid for your airplane tickets and how you're making it work financially, which I appreciate because it's really opened my eyes. It's just like it is really amazing what you do and how you play the game and you're a homeschooling mom. And I often think about what an amazing education your kids are getting as this, supplemental travel. And I often just even like wonder about your kids and like what are they gonna be like growing up having this experience of seeing the world? Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
it's remarkable to I mean, it's a little like they lack some perspective, because I'd be like, "What do you guys want to eat?" They'd be like, "We want to go to Shanghai and get that cucumber salad or something." And I'm like, "Okay, no, I mean like in the realm of actual reality that of what we're." Um, but I grew up traveling a little bit, and it really made an impression on me. And I think
Mm,
people understand. You know, I feel like one of the challenges that we have with raising children, the luckiest children, the children who have a safe and loving environment to be raised in, is that there's no opportunity to get out of your comfort zone. I mean, and travel
mm,
is fundamentally uncomfortable a lot of the time. It's disorienting. It's, you don't get your foods, you don't get your bed, things are unfamiliar. There's a lot of, unexpected situations. And I think that because travel does it often in a very safe way. Like this is not a generally like a trauma building experience when you have your flight canceled, or you can't get the food that you are used to. This is it's about building resilience. So I think that like resilience building is is so important. And as you mentioned, we got home last night, and when we were coming in last night, our flight was diverted. Actually, our landing was aborted at the last minute, and our flight was diverted, and we had to go to a different city. Um, and, so instead of getting like scared or panicked or irritated, my son was like, I need to go talk to the pilots and learn more about this. And everyone, the kids are looking at online, like what actually happened and what the records are like for this, how frequently it happens, what's the most likely outcome of what's going to happen. And so I think taking these situations where totally, I mean, we could have gotten stressed and upset, but it wouldn't have helped at all, like, at all. We
mhm,
still would have been in
mhm,
exactly the same situation. So I really like travel for that. It helps
mhm.
challenge. It doesn't mean that we don't all lose it sometimes, but it's thankfully I always say like I travel with the kids a lot, and um, I'm like the goal is just that we lose it like one at a time, not all at the same time when we're stressed out about something or something. But yeah, I think we understand each other so much better in the world if we just traveled a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I look forward to hearing about your next adventures as always. And before we go, Bevan, I have one last question for you. It's the question
Mhm.
everyone's getting in season 5. And that question is, in what ways do you feel like herbalism is misunderstood by the general public?
Oh, there's so many ways. But I think I'll pick something that's kind of conventionally topical, and that is that herbalism exists really as an alternative to conventional care and conventional medicine. And I think that's a really a very unfortunate misunderstanding that it's considered like an either or even that if you have a lot of problems with what's going on conventionally, that you would turn to herbal medicine instead and it would be the answer, because a lot of the times it isn't. There's a lot of situations where sure we used herbalism in the past in a lot of situations, and really the main reason is because we didn't have something better. um, so it doesn't mean that herbalism isn't incredible and wonderful, but there's a lot of situations where it's most appropriately used um, from kind of from a perspective of the individual and what is best for them, and that might be a combination of things. And so I think that folks will often think that, and I've found between like COVID and all sorts of different situations that a lot of people assume, that I see I also like when I first meet students coming to the graduate school or things like that, they'll often say like, "Oh yeah, well I would never like I would never take medications or pharmaceuticals or something like that," and like that's an important way to relate to somebody who uses herbal medicine, and I think it's a real shame because I think we have, we don't have to narrow our options. We really have the opportunity to integrate things really thoughtfully and to get the both worlds, and they're both so important. So
Mhm.
so I think that that's really misunderstood a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's a great important distinction of it doesn't have to be either or. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, Bevin, thank you so much for taking the time today to chat with me and to share your love of cinnamon with all of us, and especially your wonderful recipe. And again, highly recommend your book to anybody who's thinking like, yeah, I'd like to be working with herbs and spices in my everyday life. It's an excellent book for that. So thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Bevin.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the link in the video description to get free access to Bevin's Heart Synergy Fudge recipe. Also available are the complete show notes, including the transcript. You can also find Bevin at www.bevinclaire.com. If you enjoyed this interview, then before you go, be sure to click the subscribe button so you'll be the first to get my new videos, including interviews like this. I'd also love to hear your comments about this interview and this lovely spice. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks. I'm so glad you're here as part of this herbal community. Have a beautiful day.